Howdy, all you delicious people. I'm here today to review a Netflix movie called Osmosis Jones. Honestly, while watching this film, I almost honestly didn't realize how gross this movie actually was. And really, I think that is some credit to Bill Murray, but I didn't realize how just this movie was. I almost had like a gag reflex during some portions of this movie, just that's not right. So yeah, freaking some people have probably never seen this movie in their life. And maybe they're just going through this now and wanting to eventually see this because it just popped up on Netflix. And it's a live action slash animated thing where you could probably do with a lot less the whole live action part. And you could probably deal with a lot more of just wanting to see the inside of a person's body for however long in this film. So I just found also there wasn't much of any like smooth transitions. Like when you're to see maybe like Magic School Bus and stuff like that, it doesn't feel like there's a bunch of smooth transitions. It's kind of like jarring going from like an animated sequence to all of a sudden this live action thing, and it just kind of feels kind of weird, and you're not really quite understanding every bit of everything. Uh, but it's just kind of fun, but also disgusting at some points in time in this film. I'm not going to have every body part kind of thing broken down for every piece is ever like, hey, they're in the limbic system, or they're in the bladder, or they're in the this, or they're in that. But I'm going to try to just explain this stuff when eventually things are to start to come up. So yeah, just kind of a really an interesting movie, but also disgusting. And really, I can enjoy probably the much more animated parts than the actual live action. Just every bit of that movie was just to be something where I'm just like, where the live action parts are just like, man, this is so much of like a flimsy, like disinteresting story. And I just wish that there would have been actually something there for me to like both parts of this film and not just be interested in like, God, can we just get to the Chris Rock Lawrence Fishburne debacle to see what's going on there, because I don't really care what Bill Murray's to deliver us in this movie, because whatever he's deliver is just parts from just like, this sucks. In all honesty, it's kind of interesting though when eventually we trickle down to the voice acting people. Like William Shatner is in this thing, Lawrence Fishburne is in this thing, and so on and so forth. Ron Howard is in this thing, and so on. And so we have a ton of just interesting voice actors. So let's go out of our way to say that this movie was just a solid, just okay. I say okay just because, I don't want to say bad, because a lot of kids will just want to go to this movie just to see the human body and maybe how it works and have fun with it. But really, this movie overall is just there's some interesting parts, but then again, there's also this just arduous part of just God, I can't wait till this thing is over to get back to the part that I find the most interesting. Is really just the arduous process of this movie, where we have Kidney Rock, who is just doing this whatever song, and I'm just like, I don't care about that. Let's get to the important parts. There's portions of that where I'm just like, okay, I don't care about this person. I wish that they would have I wish they would have had a better focus on this movie instead of kind of jumping around all over the place with this film, and get down to the things that felt the most important and kind of skipping around a lot, which I think that this movie does. So with that said, I'm going to go out of my way to say that it's that customary time, that double five time territory, because really, it is just spoiler time. It's about that time you just spoil this movie. So again, Lawrence Fishburne being in this film. Voiceover. Anyways, so let's get into it. So very beginning of this movie, we have these people, or these animated characters, creatures, whichever, because we get a brush of different things, that are all to be inside uh, Frank's body. And so I'm not probably going to know every specific of who everyone is, where it's like, oh, uh, uh, Osmosis Jones is a white blood cell, and Drix is a this, and Tom Kalanick is a piece of crap, and I'm not gonna know the body breakdown of everything. It's just impossible. So the very first thing that we end up seeing in this film is Frank's character, who has a daughter named Shane, who he is at this zoo with because he works as kind of a greenkeeper, or kind of like a guy that's to kind of do maintenance at the zoo. And so the very beginning of here is we're to see Frank going on lunch. And so Frank has to eat this egg during lunch. And so he's talking to his daughter, and what does it just kind of fly out of his mouth? Just talking about his daughter, and how she's really grown into her own, or some goofy thing, and like just kind of talking about how like she's really grown up and whatever. And we just see Frank, who's just pouring on whatever this salt and pepper is, like a mother, or just like really just like heavily just like pouring on while he's talking further and further in depth about his daughter, and how she's really grown to be this like real woman. But eventually, somewhere down the line, she's probably gonna go and have to like get some things checked out and whatever. And I'm just, what is this dialogue? And so Frank also puts like mayonnaise on his egg, I guess. I'm like, okay, this is weird. And then he just pours on this salt. It just pours on, and then so after this huge amount of thing of dialogue, where like Frank is to go, and after this whole salt, all of a sudden this monkey is to grab this egg and is to eat it, seemingly right before Frank's very eyes. And so now Bill is wrestling with this monkey to get this egg for him to spit out. And so Shane is telling Frank, hey, stop. Like, he's already ate the egg. Give it up. And Frank's like, no. And so Frank wrestles the monkey. The monkey pops off this thing that obviously looks like a golf ball, or a ping pong ball, not an egg, or some kind of just fake egg of sorts. But because you can kind of see some marking on this somewhere. We can like tell some writing or whatever. But when this thing is to come out of this monkey's mouth, so this thing falls on the ground, and so Frank picks it up and then goes and eats it. And Shane is like, oh my god, like, you just picked that up and ate it? And Frank is like, oh, it's a 10-second rule. It's like, that was in a monkey's mouth for I don't know how many minutes. And so you're just going to go and you're going to eat that. And Frank is like, yep. And it's just, like, that is so gross. Like, you know what? If something ever falls in the floor, for me, I'm just like, okay, time to toss it away. Like, if it's something that I spent money on, if it's something, or whoever spent money on, it's just like, hey man, this fell on the floor. Like, I'm not gonna get it and pick it up. Like, no, like freaking trash it goes. Sadly enough. So, so going on here, Frank eats this thing, and it is to immediately cause this virus to appear upon his body called Thrax. And so, of course, this guy is to be Fishburne. So, Thrax is kind of floating through what is to be this part of this body where we have these germ fishermen that are kind of fishing things out, to all of a sudden fish out a virus, to where all of a sudden where this guy is to be at is to all of a sudden just start to like touch this ship and all of a sudden make it a virus ship. And so all of a sudden we have this Spanish germ that is to all of a sudden have seen this character and is now fearing for his life. So we have this ship go on and start infecting things slowly but surely. And so Frank is to or no, let's go to this Osmosis Jones thing. So there's to, of course, be a spot where Osmosis Jones is to try and take down some thief and to try and shoot his gun. And bizarrely, his gun is to not even shoot correctly. It evidently shoots too far to the right. And so he's like, man, like, I gotta figure out how to, like, work this gun. But what ends up happening is Osmosis is to accidentally, I guess, hit these, this electric, or this electricity thing, which I guess is to legitimately struck some kind of nerve of Frank's. Which all of a sudden has Frank now, like, trying to make his way home with this bucket of chicken. And then he ends up falling over on these steps, and he ends up telling his daughter, who ends up running up, because she's like, oh, what's happened? And he's like, I have a cramp. It's like we all have these problems. We all have like cramps and whatever, but like it seems like Frank is to just really just ham this up, because why wouldn't he? So all of a sudden we just see this muscle pushing against like Osmosis Jones in this entire town. So Frank goes into his house and is so his daughter is to eventually try to give him some ice. And so Frank is like, my leg. And Shane is like, oh, where? Like, here? Like, and he's like, no, leg. And so Shane goes and gives Frank a thing of chicken. And he's like, oh, thanks, that's what I needed. It's like a foot and a half away from you. The bowl is right there, but leg, give me the leg. Are you kidding me? So, but it's all out of comedy. So Frank is eating his chicken, and so like Shane is trying to be this like vegetarian or try to be this healthy girl, and is consistently trying to get her father to be that way because of her father, or because of her mother who had died via being ill. Shane doesn't want Frank to end up the same way. To just be like, hey, like, how about you start eating healthier? How about you just, like, you know what, if you just, like, jogged a little, or if you hiked a little, or if you whatever a little. And so Frank is like, well, I hiked all over the place. I hiked to go and get some, beer. I hiked to go and get this chicken. I hiked to go and get into the house. Like, it's kind of hilarious when Frank was to make it to the house, get the cramp, and Frank was to mention, like, hey, like, do you really think that we need these stairs here? Like, do you think that, like, maybe we should move? Like, maybe we should move to just get away from all these stairs. And Shane was like, no. And so Frank is just like, well, like, okay, maybe just because you love it here, maybe I'll just install a ramp instead of stairs. It's like, okay, so pushing on. So Frank is to eventually try and eat this chicken, and it seems like the chicken is going down a wrong hole or something. And so Shane is to like help uh like see what's going on in Frank's mouth, and so he opens it up and like I'm like, ew, freaking swallow. And that's what she says. So Shane is to find out that Frank just has a sore throat. And immediately Shane is to call the doctor. And so all of a sudden, inside Frank's head, there is to be this brain where this Mayor Flem is to tell Frank's character what to do. And so the mayor is to tell him that, hey, like, don't call the doctor. I'm just gonna go and take some cold medication, and I'll be fine. So the mayor, I guess, dodged this bullet, but also the mayor was to also get and see this advertisement of this new guy running for mayor. This guy named Tom Kalanick, basically a piece of crap, and he's to have this pitch about like about change and how like when he's to look at this town, the thing that he sees next is change. It's like, and he's like the kind of like cardboard cutout of every politician that you've ever tried to like hear from that are trying to like make a difference in this place. Like, well, are you really going to? So, and Mayor Flem is hearing this and hearing this whole advertisement out, and it's just like, dude, you're such a cookie cutter, freaking cardboard cutout of any kind of mayor. It's like, we'll see what you can do with this freaking mayor position when eventually the mayor is going to have to be sent to the freaking bladder and have to clean that out for however long at the end of this movie because he's pretty much like destroyed this entire town. So, uh, so really, we continue to push on. Uh, So Frank is to go on to his medicine cabinet and try to get some medication. So he ends up going and doing so, which all of a sudden is to now show that within that medication, we're to have Drix come in and try to temporarily take some parts of this body down, so it can be cured from whatever ails this, of course, Frank. So Drix is just going through and is like, "Hey, I'm the new guy. I'm the new," and so this guy is going through and just blasting everything, everybody, in like the brother. So Osmosis Jones is going with Drix to just kind of make sure everything is taken care of, and so there's to be this one Spanish germ who is to mention something in Spanish, and so Osmosis is just like, okay, like I don't know what this guy said, and all of a sudden Drix is to freeze this germ so that way Osmosis can't ask him what it is, and so Osmosis talks to Drix about it, like, hey man, you froze my witness. And Drix is just like, well, hey, like I'm sure he'll be fine in a couple of hours or couple of days from now. So they take this guy's frozen body with them, and it seems that at one point Drix is to accidentally break a piece of this person's body. So, because this Spanish germ is to seemingly have like a billion eyes, so I guess he had seen it all. So, uh, So osmosis is to go and I guess contact I think the brain or like memory. And so this woman is to just say, well, all we have is sports statistics, but maybe there's something here about what you're asking. And so eventually this girl gets back to osmosis and mentions that supposedly this is to be like the Black Death or something like that, where it's like basically it's to be this virus. Uh, so let's push on in this movie. So eventually Frank is to go to this science fair, and of course his daughter is to put together this volcano, and Frank is to basically just straight out say that his daughter is probably like the smartest girl out of everyone, and Frank is telling everybody it's like, or Frank is telling Shane it's like, hey, how about you go out there and teach everybody a thing or two because like everyone else is just a sham or whatever. So Frank just starts looking around, and all of a sudden is to see this kid with these oysters. And so Frank is like, like, hey, what are you doing, kid? And so this kid is to mention that supposedly these oysters are to have been like preserved or a certain kind of like being processed for seemingly a huge amount of time, and that like he's figured out how to be able to perfectly take care of these oysters. And so Frank is like, well, hey, like that sounds great. Like, could I try one of these? And the kid is like, well, sure, I think you should be able to. And so Frank is to down the hatch one of these oysters. And he's like, yeah, I think you should like rethink what you're doing there, buddy. And so Frank all of a sudden is talking to Mrs. Boyd, who is Shane's teacher. And so Miss Boyd mentions that uh, like it seems that Shane has been doing well in class, even though her mother has passed away, and like just talking about how great this girl is in class, and so on and so forth. So all of a sudden, while Mrs. Boyd is going on and on and on about this, all of a sudden Frank's body is to tell us that he's going to probably yak soon, or barf, or Ralph. So, or puke. So, Frank's face all of a sudden starts to become like almost green. And so Mrs. Boyd is like, are you okay, Frank? And he's like, you know what? I'm not quite sure. You know, so Mrs. Boyd is to mention about this kid's oysters, where I think he had just gotten these today and is just talking on and on about these oysters, even though like he probably doesn't know a lick of what he's even saying. And so Frank is just like, oh my god, like this kid gave me something that I don't even know like what it is. So while Mrs. Boyd is talking, all of a sudden Frank is just to exorcist just blah, 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 all over this woman. And all of a sudden, like the photo of the science fair in the news, and this goes viral and everything, is Frank just barfing on this woman. And like that's the only thing that's going to be remembered within the science fair. It's just Frank barfing on this woman, where all of a sudden Miss Boyd is to file a restraining order on Frank because of how hugely popular this whole thing was, and how like she had grown to be like Mrs. Boyd had gone to be such ashamed and of this whole event, because now that's what everyone talks about when they talk about her, which is just an awful thing. So and eventually we have Frank, who is to eventually have this this thing planned about him going to this buffalo winged getaway where it seems that he has this brochure where there's to be this buffalo wing contest at this location, and Frank is wanting to just be like, yeah, like this is where I'm going to go with my daughter to see the sights. And so Frank is to eventually sit down with Shane and pitch this to her, and she's to be like, well, you know what, like this is not something that I immediately want to do, obviously. And because Shane again wants to continue to eat healthy, so Shane kind of argues with Frank because Frank at some point in time like uh just gave her like a turkey Slim Jim or whatever for lunch, and Frank was like, well, technically it's healthy because it's turkey. Okay, all right. So uh so Shane is to go on and try to just want to eventually do a hiking thing and do something active. So we eventually have Leia, who's to be working with the mayor, who is trying to, in Frank's brain, try and control him and try to tell him to try to talk to his daughter about hiking, but he doesn't. Like he's just like, no, I'm not going to do that. So, uh, so pushing on, what ends up happening is instead of Shane going with Frank to this buffalo wing place, he ends up going out with Bob, his brother. There used to be one spot where both Bob and Frank were eventually cleaning up probably animal crap, and there's two other coworkers that are making fun of them. Just be like, ha 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 ha, like, what does it feel like to work with two idiots? And the guys are just like, these animals are like idiots, and the guys were like, no, we were talking to the animals, not you. So Bob all of a sudden is to mention because Frank is having some nose issues, because we end up finding out that both Osmosis Jones and Drix are making their way to Frank's nose. And it seems that there was to be some kind of uh, like wall or barrier in Frank's nose to not let rush all of the boogers out, let's just say. So all of a sudden we find out that Drax is going through and and going on and taking down this bridge, so all this mucus just can just fly out. So that way Drax can be continuously part of this infection that's going on. So, and we also had this moment where supposedly this dust was to fly in to Frank's nose, and supposedly his nose defenders were like fighting all the dust off so Frank doesn't sneeze, which I thought was interesting. Maybe that must be some anti-allergy stuff that he uh, took, to where they would start to defend all of this dust that went into Frank's nose while he's walking. So all of a sudden we have Drax, who takes down this booger wall to have all these boogers just flying down Frank's nose. And so Bob is to mention like, "Hey man, do you have a Kleenex?" And so Frank is just like, "Well, like give me a sec," and then he just heaves it all in. I'm like, oh my god. So it all just goes right back in the nose, and it's like, okay, this is just goofy. But anyways, so they end up finding out that this virus is to be real. So it seems that we eventually in the body eventually get acne upon like right in between the eyebrows, because evidently Frank had like basically just wiped his face with a thing of chicken or chicken grease, and so I guess that just immediately just stuff happens. So all of a sudden, Frank is to have this thing, let's just say, upon his head, and so that is to lead to Osmosis Jones and Drix and everybody are heading into this part of that body, and acne, let's just say. And so they go to this club, and supposedly there's like Kidney Rock performing, and so the virus is to be within this club also, and so he's to kind of tell all of these guys, um, like Joe Cramp and all these other kind of people, what's going on, all these thugs, to just kind of tell them like, hey man, I'm gonna take over this body. I'm gonna go after the brain. I'm gonna take everything. Like we're just gonna wipe this body out. We're gonna kill this body off. So Osmosis Jones is going in there with a disguise, and Drix is trying to have a disguise, but it's not very well. So Osmosis Jones gets into the part where they're to talk about what's going on, and so Osmosis Jones is trying to stall these people and trying to ask questions and trying to have other people kind of fakingly say that, hey man, don't do this week, do it next week because I have WrestleMania tickets, or some other kind of crap, some other goofy excuse. So eventually this guy continues to ask too many questions, and so Thrax is just like, who are you? Like, why are you asking so many questions, know-it-all? So eventually this leads to them figuring out, because eventually Wallet slips out of Osmosis Jones's pocket and says that, oh, he's a Frank police. So all of a sudden Drix busts in and starts blasting people, and so what ends up happening is uh, Frank's acne starts to blow, and while this is happening, so gross. So Frank is to talk to Miss Boyd and to kind of talk to her during school uh, about things and how uh, Miss Boyd kind of brings up the whole like she's been scarred ever since that video. And Frank is like, well, that's great and all, but could you just put down the 10,000 yards thing for me to be able to just kind of like see my daughter during certain kind of things? So they have this disagreement, which leads to a disgusting moment where all of a sudden Frank is mentioned, hey, you have a little white on you. Miss Boyd is like, ew! She gets sick. I'm just like, it's so gross. Um, Gets my gag reflex going just thinking about it. So luckily I don't have to think about it past this moment. So going through this movie, supposedly now Osmosis to go back to his superiors, and so they mentioned to him that it's like, hey man, like uh you went rogue and you did an unauthorized thing here and there. And so Drix was to mention these guys as like, well, hey, he had to do that on purpose because there was a virus like within that area, and so he did the thing that he thought was like the best he can do. Like there was also this interesting part where Thrax was to establish dominance between these thug guys, where all of a sudden he was to like mention how bad he was, but there was these thug guys that thought they were better, and so Thrax goes and like kills them easily. And then they're like, "Oh, what do you want, sir? What do you want, new boss?" It's kind of a funny moment. So pushing on, we end up finding out that Thrax is not all that done with. That eventually he's still in the body, so eventually he's still coming. Let me pause here for a second. All right. So now we get a moment where Frank is to be talking with Bob, and they're gonna go off to this whole like Buffalo Wing event thing, because Shane is just disinterested in the whole event, and she just doesn't want to talk to anybody, doesn't want to talk to her Uncle Bob, doesn't want to talk to anyone. So uh, Shane is to, or Bob is to go and see Frank, and Frank is looking a little bit like kind of just ill or something like that. It seems like some kind of cold or something. So what Bob does is Bob says it like, well, hey, how about you drink some beer? You'll be fine then. Like, you got to drink a lot of liquids. Beer is technically a liquid, and Frank is looking at Bob. He's like, are you sure that I should be drinking a lot of beer? And Bob is like, yeah, liquids, fluids, come on, like, get them in you. Like, drink that whole thing. You'll feel great. So, Frank just starts drinking this whole thing, and Bob, like, slaps him on the tummy. I'm just like, these guys were in, like, uh, Groundhog's Day, and look where they are now. Just slapping one another on the belly, just like, hey, feeling good? Like, okay. So Frank and Bob are going on their road trip, and Shane is going off on her field trip with her class. So Frank is driving his car, and so now we start to see Thrax, who's really just starting to just go through and rip and tear through every part of Frank's body, and just wanting to just kill it off. And so he's kind of spouting through and taking everything down. And the Mayor Flem is to try and talk to Bob, and is to just say that he's supposedly fine when Frank really isn't. So Frank is driving, and all of a sudden, the virus is getting more and more severe, and so Frank is eventually just to kind of like conk out or fall over, and so all of a sudden Shane, with her bus, is to all of a sudden see Frank getting hauled away by this ambulance, and so Shane is to demand to the bus driver to stop this whole bus to make her way to see her dad get hauled away. Bob is to mention to these people, hey, like she's my I think he ends up saying I'm her niece, which like obviously it's like she's my niece, but I think he says I'm her niece. I think is what he ends up saying. Either way, it doesn't really matter. So like I don't think Bob really knows what to actually say here. So I think he like I think he just makes up something. I don't think there's actually lines here. I think that like maybe they were just supposed to like stand there and look at awe of Frank just being hauled away. Maybe there wasn't lines there, so I guess Bob maybe had to like come up with some. I don't know. It just seems like there wasn't much of any lines there. Maybe somebody forgot what their lines were. Whatever. So the bus drives away, and so Shane and Bob are now going to the hospital to see how Bob is doing, or Frank is doing, not Bob. So Frank is struggling, and so Osmosis Jones is to have like Thrax. Thrax is going through and decimating this body, and then Thrax is also just trying to run and get out of there so maybe he can infect someone else. And he's trying to leave from I think the mouth because he's in the little trickle upon your throat. So Osmosis and Thrax are trying to battle it out, but eventually Thrax makes his way from out of Frank's mouth to try and get into Shane, and so Osmosis has Drix shoot him out to try to intercept Thrax, which leads to Shane getting like both Thrax and Osmosis to like fight upon her body, and so like they bizarrely are like fighting like right around her eyes or her eyelashes, and so Shane is getting all teary eyed looking over her father because supposedly like these doctors are just kind of giving up on Bob. It's like, or God, why do I keep saying Bob? They keep giving up on Bill. They keep giving up on Frank, and they keep just saying like, "Oh, he's dead." Like, I guess they just don't know what they're doing, so they're just like, "Ah, oh, he's dead." Like, let's call it a day. And so, what ends up happening is Osmosis ends up chucking Thrax into this thing of alcohol within this doctor's hospital, which Thrax ends up getting dissolved. And so Osmosis, because of a tear from Shane making it back into Frank's bizarrely mouth, Osmosis comes back and comes back with the thing of which that was to have killed Frank, and is to now bring him back to life coincidentally without the help of any of the doctors. So Frank is to just seemingly be awake, and so Frank ends up telling Shane like, "Hey, your mother says hi," because of course her mother is to be sadly dead. So really what we see like after this moment, we transition to having Hank trying to live some kind of much more seemingly healthier life. He's to grab a carrot and eat it, and he's to have seemingly been doing some rock climbing, but then we end up finding out that he drove most of the way and then walked like 20, 30 feet to some boulder to just kind of like climb up there. It's like, hey, we did it. But hey, that's some kind of healthy, right? Like you're being active technically. So hey, like he did it. So Mayor Flem is just to be seen just cleaning up some bladder problem, and so Mayor Flem is to see this button that says "Do not touch," and he touches it. All of a sudden, Frank is to fart, and Shane is like, "Oh, you farted?" And he's like, "Better out than in, I guess," or whatever. So, yeah, there was also this funny part where they were to do this news segment where all of a sudden there was to be these animal crackers that they showcase in the stomach. Like, hey guys, we got brand new animal crackers, aren't they? Like, aren't they cute? And, but yeah, so like, hopefully all this gets wrapped up. Hopefully all this seems okay enough. But yeah, like some people might have hated this movie. Some people might have liked it. Some people might have had different opinions about it. I don't know. I just wanted to cover it. I think there was a show that happened after this. I don't know. So I'm going to get out of here. Goodbye, everybody. Bye, everybody.